Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Agency Life, 4 Tips for Producing Great Creative Work Efficiently. Thanks for joining us. I'm Lucia Morris, Coordinator at Custom, DIGIDAY's creative content agency, and I will be your moderator. Today's webinar is sponsored by Workfront, an online project management software that allows you to manage your work in one place. It's the only comprehensive tool that eliminates extra work and simplifies everything from communication with real-time collaboration to project tracking and reporting. Workfront helps your organization improve the bottom line by removing inefficiencies and clutter. If you're live tweeting along with us today, use the hashtag AgencyLife. And now, let's quickly go over the agenda. After I introduce our fabulous presenters, they'll dive into the myths and realities of agency life, and then focus on 4 key solutions to creating your best work. A question and answer period will follow the presentation, so please stay with us until the end. Feel free to submit questions at any time via the GoToWebinar panel. Everyone who registered for today's webinar will also receive an email with a recording of the session tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. We're joined today by Lee Oden and Heather Hurst. Lee is CEO and co-founder of Top Rank Marketing, the author of Optimize, and the creator and editor-in-chief of Online Marketing Blog. With 20 years in the online marketing industry and over 13 years of blogging, Lee has consulted for numerous Fortune 500 companies and presented at conferences all over the world on digital marketing and PR. While he has been cited for his expertise by the Wall Street Journal, The Economist, and Forbes magazine, his kids keep him grounded and focused on what's most important. Heather has enjoyed playing the game of marketing for the past 15 years at the agency and corporate level in both B2C and B2B companies. She's run PR campaigns that took her from the MTV Beach House to NASDAQ and many media outlets and content channels in between. She's currently the corporate marketing director at Workfront. Okay, let's get started. Lee, take it away.
Awesome. Agency life, right? It's glamorous. I know when I was at university many years ago, in my graphic design classes, I used to imagine how amazing it would be to work at an agency or even have my own, making cool projects, making cool stuff for cool brands, and just generally having a great time.
We all dreamed of that, right?
Yeah. But of course, a lot of the agency cool ideas promoted elsewhere, right? Like on TV. Whether you're a fan of Mad Men or The Crazy Ones, media often romanticizes what working at an agency is like, you know, pitching big brand clients and always working on amazing projects. Everything goes great, almost. I can't count how many times I've seen shows, maybe you've seen them too, where an underdog agency executive has to overcome insane obstacles traveling across the city with a portfolio to make it to a pitch meeting and then actually win the deal, win the gig.
Yeah, and then all of that creative will go live the next day. Yeah, and they present it on a flip chart. Yep, okay. Yep.
And this sort of idea is propagated in the movies too, right? It's all romantic. It's all planes, trains, and automobiles. It all runs perfectly. Well, maybe not. I think it's not all roses when it comes to agency life. We know that, and the drama has a whole different meaning when the rubber hits the road for a lot of agency work environments. Maybe it's even sometimes a little more like a horror movie. And I'm sure people can relate to the idea of changing workloads too, I mean, it's not just like deadlines and trying to get so much stuff done. I like this, attack the mutating workload. The workload takes a life of its own, yeah. Darn that PTO guilt. You know that person who just won't go on vacation, ever? They stay so long in the office. Yeah, you wonder where they live. They're at the office. Wait a minute, that's me. Oh, sorry. You've got to have a balance, really. I mean, some individuals do live on this stuff, but most normal human beings don't, and so we've got to keep those workloads in check. But we know this is a major concern within agency life, right? And there's another one There's another one of these kind of scary scenarios that's almost too taboo to talk about when you're at an agency like myself, but this is just between us, okay? It's clients, and it's demanding clients to be more specific. Whether it's a large company that's used to leveraging their weight, their brand weight, to push the bar on scope creep, all the way to companies that have never hired an agency before, and they get their unrealistic expectations from TV, just like I had those romantic ideas about what agency life would be like back when I was in college. And you might have heard this sort of situation from a prospective client if you work at an agency. Okay, what we want you to do is we want you to show us that you have some skin in the game by developing the creative strategy for us for free, and if we like it, we'll hire you.
They'll give you that privilege.
Yes, it happens. And the thing is if you are successful, and when your agency grows, good luck with resources that are stretched too thin, because it's inevitable. And depending on your labor market, it might be tough to find new staff. It might be tough to do a lot of things, especially with being efficient with how you do what you do. Busy and focused is fun, but it's fun for a while, but it's not fun if that's the way it is all the time, right? And there's one thing too that there's a lot we have to deal with, obviously, and there's one thing that does stay the same when we work at an agency, and that, of course, is the fact that things are going to change. So it's on our next slide. There's a really good poster about that, where what we've got to do, obviously, is not only be good at our job, but we also have to stay on top of what's going on in the world around us, right? In our area of expertise, not just as a designer or a copywriter or a project manager or art director, but we also have to stay on top of what's current in our clients' industry as well, and that's a lot. That's a lot to stay on top of. So another thing that can be a big issue in our little collection of horror movies, so to speak, of agency life, is approval processes. And, operationally, things can get so convoluted that it's hard to see whether you can make any progress. There's all these roadblocks, and that happens for a variety of reasons. You have individuals who are human bottlenecks, or you have processes that just aren't very effective. So it's kind of like you've got a bunch of holes in your bucket. You know what I mean? Hamster in a hamster cage. You just can't quite get things done in a way that we can meet deadline. It can be a really big challenge. So there's a lot of challenge leading up to what the problem, in terms of problems with agency life, that we can solve, though. And that's the good news.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with you, Lee. And at Workfront, we did a survey last fall asking about kind of the state of marketing work. And there were a few kind of startling statistics that we took away. One was that marketers' days are honestly getting shorter. When we asked the respondents how they spend their time each day, they said that only 38% of their time was spent performing the primary duties of their job. And I think you can look at this through a couple of lenses. Wow. First, you can say there's stuff coming at them from everywhere. And the other thing, they said the rest of their time was on admin tasks, wasteful meetings, interruptions. Heaven help me, the 8% is spent on interruptions. And it becomes really complicated also to think about how we're defining our roles today, because if 17% of our time is spent on email and we don't consider email to be part of our primary job duty, there's kind of a complication there overall. And so then that would ask you would naturally ask, so what else are marketers doing? And just to hit at the top 3 of this list, because obviously there's a ton of distraction that's going on, marketers are in meetings that have no point. I think a lot of those are status meetings where you're doing a round robin and only one person is listening to the updates being given by each of the 20 people in the room. Excessive oversight is something that marketers definitely don't enjoy. And then we see emails once again are coming up that this is where we're spending a lot of our time. But the good news is that there is hope. again, looking at the top 3, we asked the respondents what they could do to improve their overall work productivity, you know, to get them out of those meetings and to get them out of email and to have more time on their job. And, you know, 29% said uninterrupted blocks of time, which takes no cost. This is of no expense to an agency. This can be as simple as having a quiet room where people can go to work where you can't talk, you can only be in there working, down to having meeting-free chunks of time, whether that's an entire day or just blocks in people's schedules. You know, and then they would like to see better qualified people and resources, which we're going to get into later here, and more accountability, which we're also going to talk about a little bit more. So it's definitely time to stop living this grind that we're living in today, where, you know, I think most of us who've spent any significant time in agency, and you find somebody else who has worked in an agency, you sort of have this almost support group mentality together. Definitely time to turn around the way that agencies are being run today. And Lee and I are going to talk about, we're going to break it into these 4 core topics that we did cover in the agenda. We're going to talk about how you can find balance, how you can have better communication with both clients as well as internally, how you can manage expectations, which is a big part of things that can lead to burnout, and then how you can provide the right level of service for your clients as well as service to your employee base.
Excellent. Great introduction to that, Heather. You know, I think it's an internal conflict for creative work at scale is finding the right balance, right? Because you have to have balance. It's essential to sustain both the quality of work at an agency and the quality of life for the people that are making the work. And obviously without it, the work will suffer, and when work suffers, you have a domino effect, right? It affects all of the things in the agency, especially profitability and client retention and all those other things. So we're going to talk a little about here how we can bring more balance into our agency life. So first, you have to decide, where are you going to put your time into solving this first? Are you going to put it into creativity? Or are you going to put it into structure? And a good example that I've experienced myself is a production team member that wants a better process to help them create their best work, but there's no time to create a better process because of the inefficiency of the current processes. Crazy, right? It's a circle of hell.
Frustrating.
Is what it is. So, as you know, one of my favorite people, of course, is Jon Stewart, and he has this great quote about the role of creativity in structure or process. And as he implies, structure and process can play a very important role with great creative work. And management has to understand that creatives can't just be turned on and off like machines, and at the same time, left to their own devices, they'll never get anything done. So there's a certain amount of structure that's necessary to provide folks direction and an environment where there's also enough creative freedom for them to produce great work on time, right? And this is good for companies too. There's actually a study done at Columbia. Rita Gunther McGrath studied over 2,300 companies, or studied 2,300 companies, and she found that 10 of them grew by over 5% over 10 years. And the common characteristic that she found is that these companies that were so successful possessed characteristics in common, that they were both speed of innovation, or rapid innovators, I should say, and stability. Both existed within those companies. So they could adjust and readjust their resources very quickly, and they had a stable environment in which to do that. There was another study by McKinsey that showed companies, and this is where speed and stability come into play, that companies with both speed and stability had a 70% chance of being ranked in the top quartile by organizational health. So this is an important indicator of the need for balance, not only for producing the best work, but also for having a great company.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Lee. And I think speed and agility definitely work best when they do have some structure to put around, so that you know that you're working toward an end goal and you have a process that supports it, and that will help you to get there a lot faster. And one way that you can do that, one way that you can help to strike that balance is by documenting your workflow, which sounds really simple, but you would be surprised how often, if you think back on your career or on past projects you've tackled, how much a lack of a documented workflow or a lack of a process in general can really be a limiter to getting things done. And a few things that you would want to have in that documented workflow are, first, a process to receive work requests. So that can be anything that works for your company. That could be an inbox, that's workrequest@companyname.com. That could be a project management system that has a request queue. That could be a shared Google form, some way that requests come into your system. And then, once you get all of these requests, and I think this is where we can run into issues, is how do you prioritize those requests? I know a lot of companies, a lot of agencies will rank requests by the person who's screaming the loudest, the client who pays the most. But really, really it comes down to, how are you going to move the needle on the business? How are you going to be impactful for your client? How are you going to help their business move faster? And that's how you can put the most priorities in place. And then, of course, you always have ad hoc requests. And unfortunately, in the agency world, this probably exists more than anywhere else. So how do you rank and how do you tackle ad hoc requests? Because you can't have the solution be that people work late every single night forever in order to tackle those requests. So what is your protocol? And this is harder in the agency world because you have to live up to client expectations, which we'll get to here in a minute. But really having a process will help to mitigate some of that. And then lastly, having templates for your production. This is a really key piece to ensuring that you don't miss steps in anything you're creating, whether it's a small social media campaign or a massive, huge event for a client. Having a process and a template for that process will help to ensure that you don't miss anything. It could be as simple as, at the beginning of a project, you need to have a signed SOW from a client. And if you don't have that, you can't kick it off. Well, if you miss that step, you could get into trouble later. So having all of that documented will definitely help.
Templates, I agree. Templates are absolutely critical for consistency of work quality. And also when you have new people coming on board, when you have established process and templates, it gets them up to speed more quickly.
Totally agree. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's surprising how many steps you miss when you don't have it written down. You could be doing something like writing a press release that you've done a billion times in your career, but every single time it can have some little nuance differences or some little step that you forget, and that can derail your whole timeline, or at least derail your evening.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and as part of those templates, creative briefs are a really big part of this. I love this far side because I think that the horse that this guy's riding is indicative of how projects can turn out when you don't have a well-defined creative brief at the beginning of your project. Yes, everybody hates them. Yes, they're a pain to get approved. Yes, everybody will say that you have way too many lines to fill out, but they're a must-have to ensure that you accomplish your end goal, ends up being what you wanted it to be. So definitely,
absolutely. I was just going to say, what's great about a creative brief is it really gives you all the answers to why. And if there's one thing that causes scope creep and some of the other distractions is not knowing why. People don't have the dots connected, and a creative brief is instrumental in taking care of that.
I completely agree. In fact, an agency that I worked for, one of the principals there, he would say that you should spend, of the amount of time that you're going to spend on a project, 50% of it should be on getting the creative brief right, and the other 50% on actual execution, because that huge amount of time spent on the brief will ensure that that second half of the project goes like clockwork.
Exactly.
And then it's not all about billable hours. Again, going back to balance, you can't just come in and slog through the day, all day, working every second, unless I guess you're Dwight on The Office, who was able to pull it off. You've got to have some balance in the time that you spend in the office. which means you need to find time to innovate. You need to find time to think about new things that you could bring into your clients or bring to the agency. Having time to cross-train and learn and connect with your peers can be really, really critical in building skill sets and improving the overall, I guess, quality of life that your employees have at your agency. And one great way to do that is by having special projects that you take on with your team, whether that's doing service outside the agency, which is what I did at an agency I was with, or if that's coming up with creative for a client you don't even have, but something that would stretch your creativity. Looking for special projects is a really great way to go.
Yeah, I agree. That's you have companies taking inspiration from Google's 20% thing that they used to do and allocating a percentage of time for people to work on special projects within the agency. It might just be agency development. It might be cross-training. It might be furthering their own skills through doing, like for us, lunch and learn kind of, things where anybody can give a class, that others can sign up for.
Yeah, which is a great idea because it's also building a skill set of public speaking
Yes.
and documenting your ideas. It all can end up benefiting everybody involved.
Everybody wins.
Absolutely. Which then brings us to communication. How do you communicate effectively with both the employees of the agency as well as your clients? And this can be where you run into a lot of problems when there's a communication breakdown that could have prevented something from flaring up. And, like snowflakes, every client can be different, and it's up to the agency working with the client to figure out how much communication the client really wants. You definitely need to have proactive outreach with your clients. I know there can be clients who go dark, and some agencies really love those clients because they continue to bill a retainer without actually having to talk. But it's not the right way to go, and is a very, very bad example of a client-agency partnership, or I guess lack thereof. Every time I've heard stories like that, I just cringe and kind of want to walk away, like I don't want to be a witness to the crime in case I'm called to testify later. And then there are times when account teams wait to have a problem and then they try to fix it. One agency that I work with, they send out a quarterly survey, kind of satisfaction survey, to see how they rank. It's 3 or 4 questions, but basically the bottom line is, how is our time working with the agency going? And it's a great opportunity for them to identify any issues early before they would have filtered up to, the top brass of the agency, so to speak. And then there just aren't enough moments of truth. Oh, go ahead, Lee.
No, just saying that's a great idea, that's sort of a structured feedback, you know what I mean? Because I'm sure their account people are getting feedback, but there's a certain context for that. So for the agency to send out a more formal survey is another opportunity for them to, provide feedback, to provide the kind of information necessary to make it a great experience, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and this particular agency, they don't let me not do it, if that makes sense. They will follow up with me repeatedly and say, Heather, this is really key to make sure that we're all working together really well. And just the fact that they do it at all gives me a better sense of an open line of communication to them if anything were to come up.
Definitely.
Well, and then, when you look at communication and when you look at the challenges that companies have working with agencies, it's really sad to see in this survey done by a company called Clutch that communication came out at the top of the list, which shows that while there's a lot of good theory around communication, I think there's a lot to be solved.
And it's also pretty important to find your canary. I love that expression. Because things can go wrong. I mean, it's not like hitting a golf ball and you can, you're off a little bit at the beginning and it's hundreds of yards off down the fairway, and nobody's hurt by that really, except for that guy standing over in the sand dune. No, really, you need to find a way to have your fingers on the pulse of what's going on in the agency early enough so you can avoid disaster, right? You identify issues before they become a problem. And so part of doing that starts with building maturity into your processes, so that way you can see issues coming. And if you have standards, for example, for certain kinds of client engagements or individual tasks, ranging from creating an infographic to a motion graphic, having those standards will help identify potential problems when those tasks start to deviate from the norm, and you should have some means of tracking your work so you can identify those deviations and you can kind of reach out and just make sure things are on track, versus it getting all the way to a client deliverable, for example. Another way to kind of find your canary, so to speak, is to give visibility into agency activities and communicate with clients in terms of expectations. So whether it's managing overall hours for an engagement compared to a benchmark of some kind, or individual hours for very specific tasks, getting a heads up really early is going to trigger the need to communicate either with staff or with the client so you can get everything back on track. Another essential part of communication is being able to have uncomfortable conversations, both with clients and with your own staff. And you shouldn't confuse uncomfortable content with uncomfortable situations. And people who like to talk shop in the bathroom, I'm talking to you. You know who I'm talking about.
I hope their numbers are dwindling every day.
Hey, Bob, I just got a quick question for you.
Yeah,
somebody calling me Bob is already off track, right?
Right, absolutely.
It's also important to create guidelines that your staff can follow. So for escalation, right? So whether it's interacting with a stubborn employee or if it's working with a client and things are just really, really going off track, there should be some compliance or documented processes that people can follow so they know what route to take before it totally blows up. And you get into a situation where someone overcommits a solution and it's inappropriate, and then the agency's on the hook for doing 1,000% more work than was originally agreed to, which is no good for anybody. So another angle or situation here is scope creep, which I think is its own type of horror movie. The attack of the scope creep. I'm sure we have to have that slide next time. Especially when things go off balance, because scope creep can be very, very expensive situation, and the fault isn't always going to lie with demanding clients. Scope creep can occur because of, let's say, an account manager that wants to push beyond the stated deliverables, either because they're recovering from an issue, or maybe they just want to impress the client early on in the engagement. So you've got to make it easy for clients to communicate with you about project scope, underserved, overserved, and by documenting what the project scope is and communicating that with them. And you use that documented scope of work as part of the project management so that everyone is clear from a timeline perspective, if anything else, where we are, what's next, what came before us, and when are we when are we finished, sort of thing, right? It should be crystal clear where we are at all times, and then we can avoid, some of these problems.
Well, and I think having that open line of communication with your clients will also help with this, because if you do have scope creep, you have a way to come to them and have a friendliness with them that you can say, hey, remember you said you wanted A, well, now we're delivering B, C, D, we need to have a conversation.
Right. And even having, like we suggested earlier, having those documented processes for ad hoc requests, the ad hoc request process that you would use internally to better manage your team's hours and time, there's obviously got to be something that allocates for that on the client side as well. And if that means, okay, well, if things at this threshold will trigger a change request, right, which is an additional billable item, or can we squeeze this in, or is this something we can eat? Having some sort of framework for how that works is really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another big part of our overall solution to creating our best creative work has to do with expectations. And I think we can all agree that setting expectation is probably one of the most valuable and important things as that a consultant can do. Clients can set expectations as well, but when it comes to the agency, it really is critical for a great client-agency relationship. And not only do we need to set and manage expectations according to the work that we're going to do, but agencies need to figure out how to do this equitably across their portfolio of clients, right? So everyone gets the same love. So you have to ask, how do you manage client expectations and your team's workload? Now, people tend to understand things in terms of what they've already experienced. For example, sometimes you'll take on a client who hasn't worked with an agency very often or before, and their expectations are based on previous vendor relationships that just don't sync well with agency work. In that case, it's essential to set expectations immediately, but during the pitch, the proposal, and even onboarding. And like I said before, it's not just clients that push back on expectations. Internal staff can do this too. An example is when people who are in charge of managing a process aren't sure of all the turnaround time for all the interdependent tasks. Without that certainty of how long things take, it can create friction between the account team and the production teams and result in pretty unreasonable client expectations as big promises are made and the client expects that's the way it's going to happen on a go forward. So to manage expectations and team workload, project managers are going to have a very clear understanding of the project and visibility into team workflow so that expectations can be managed with a client as well as with the team members at the agency that are working on the project. So one particular way to be effective with setting expectations is understanding what clients want. And here we have results from a study from SOTA report, reported by SOTA report, about what clients want. Project management was listed as one of the top challenges of working with an agency. And I wouldn't be surprised that the fact that 68% of agencies are still using spreadsheets for project management isn't part of the problem. Right? The inefficiencies and opportunities for error especially are hugely risky when agencies are using spreadsheets. As convenient as Google Sheets are, you know, at your own risk, at your peril, I guess.
Maybe not the best way to go, right? Well, and spreadsheets also, you know, are often kept on a desktop, and they really don't give the level of visibility that clients want into what the heck you're doing every day to support their account.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. Especially, you know, if you have versioning problems and people copying and pasting templates with bad data or bad formulas, and it's just, trust me, I've seen it. We lived this at our agency in the past, and we are moving to the wonderful Workfront platform, so no more of that.
I remember a client that I had when I worked at agency, you know, I had just gotten a big win for them. We had our next meeting, and he looked at me and said, well, Heather, what have you done for me lately? What are you going to be doing for me next? And I think it was at that moment I realized, number one, clients always want more, and number two, having an ongoing plan that you've made visible to the client is really, really important to show that you know what's going to come next. And, you know, it can't be like when at the end of Indiana Jones, when they stored the Ark of the Covenant and they did it in such a way that nobody would be able to find it again. You can't do that same thing with your work and your planned work with your clients. You know, find a way to open your work queues, whether that's going to a formal project management system that you can give access to with your clients, or having a shared document or some other shared repository where you're constantly updating your clients on what you have done and what you're doing. You know, digital review and approval helps a lot to ensure that nothing is missed and nothing falls through the cracks, although that can get a little out of hand. I was just talking to an agency where on one piece of creative, they had 900 review comments and
Oh
only
my
12
gosh.
were actionable. So I guess also kind of keep it in check a little bit to
Wait,
whatever extent you don't want to be murdered.
You mean like, hey, can you move that period over a couple of pixels? No, wait, can you move it back a couple of pixels?
Yeah, and I think it was a lot of just, I agree, yes, what they said, that kind of stuff. So yeah, definitely within reason. And then status updates are necessary and status meetings are necessary when you're talking about strategy and what really needs to come next from a bigger picture standpoint. But you can get rid of a lot of that by just providing more visibility into your upcoming workflow.
Excellent.
Well, and then, coming to our fourth key point here is service. So maintaining consistent client service by retaining your best employees is really, really key, because nothing is more disruptive to an account than losing a member of your account team that had been really, really great, really key to driving success, who knew the client extremely well. That can be extremely disruptive, and the last thing you want to do is lose them because of any degree of burnout or the fact that they didn't like what was going on at the agency. You really need to find ways to maintain those employees. One thing that you can do, sort of going back to communication, is just talk to your team members. Have open lines of communication where they can come and tell you if they're getting burned out or if they're being overloaded. In our 24/7, I can work from anywhere sort of society that we're in now, you actually can have employees that are contributing a lot in the off hours, working from home, working late at night, and you may not actually see it. The clients might be seeing it, but the management may not see it, which can be really critical to a breakdown of communication between an employee and a manager, and can, result in a less than healthy, happy, and engaged employee.
One of my account managers told me she genericized the scenario, but that kind of fits
Names
here.
were changed to protect the innocent.
So the account manager gets out of the meeting and says, "Oh wow, what a great opportunity to upsell a particular client on this thing that they really need and that we could deliver for them." And so they go get some planning tasks on the team's plate into the team's queue so they can rock and roll on this new thing. And it looks like let's say the copywriter only has 2 tasks on their plate today, and so the account manager just says, "I'll just squeeze it in this afternoon." And then the copywriter goes, whoa. I already have an 8-hour day with all my meetings. Now we have all these additional tasks. How can they manage all that, right? And it gets crazy. Without visibility, chaos, right? Chaos ensues.
Absolutely. Well, and you make a good point. There's not only visibility into the workload, but also visibility into that assigned workload, which resources have been assigned to execute against any given task, and where else are they being distracted is the wrong word, but where else are they spending their time, in meetings or working on other account projects? Yeah, definitely.
Right. Still, right, you said before, only 38% of people's time are actually spent on work.
Yeah,
so
and sometimes that's on a good day.
Yeah.
Well, and it really does matter because, we're losing billions of dollars to absenteeism, tardiness, burnout, all of these things that result in work-related stress and people leaving. And I don't know if this is even longer on the agency side, but the salary cost to train a new employee can be huge, and that there's also this impact to the consistency with your clients.
We do experience that. The standard is very high at our agency. We're very innovation focused, so the talent that is necessary to deliver on that kind of promise is pretty significant. So therefore, there's the top rank marketing way, if you will. People, they learn all those ways of doing things, and now they need to learn the right way, so to speak. Or more innovative way, and it takes a long time. It can take a long time, and you invest a lot of time and resources, and I know we do, into training folks up only to lose them because of something that could have easily been solved is heartbreaking. It really is. Not only to the agency as a business, but also to their peers. So really, I couldn't agree more, the importance of keeping your best talent. And, you know, there's some fundamental things I guess you can do. I'm sure we could do a whole HR-ish type presentation about what you can do to keep talent. But I think you've got to document first what typical work thresholds are, right? What's reasonable? So people's time can be managed and adjusted as necessary. You know, if you don't know what is normal or typical for the completion of a particular task, then you'll have people who may not have experience with that sort of thing assigning those tasks and then not having reasonable internal expectations on their completion. And that can create a lot of friction. Nobody's happy, right? And when you amplify that over time, that can lead to an exit. You've also got to focus on or do one-to-ones, right? So there's got to be an upstream manager who is responsible for the work of an individual or a group of individuals, and they need to have those one-on-one meetings so they can reconcile work and get people back on track. You know, I've seen it happen often where, you know, especially a really talented person, they're getting requests like crazy because they do such a great job, and all of a sudden their queue is just like, it's insane. And so, you know, it's important, if they don't have the self-awareness to go reach out to their upstream supervisor, go, hey, I got 12 hours booked every day for the next 3 days. Can someone, you know, can you work with me to reallocate these tasks? Then the supervisor's got to be managing or monitoring that person's workflow to see that kind of thing happening, and then be able to have that one-on-one and reconcile that task and then readjust work tasks and reassign things so they have a normal, human-friendly workload. So the other thing is to make sure that there's a constant feedback loop with individuals and teams about their performance, and so that you have some insight as to whether processes are working well for both individuals and for the team at large. All very, very important components to keeping your best talent. Obviously, I'm a big fan of recognition. When you identify goals as individuals, and it's just part of, you know, management of staff, is identifying specific goals for them as individuals, as a group, as a team, as a company, and then having really good feedback mechanisms to deliver progress reports and also to recognize people for their contribution to helping achieve those goals. Again, whether they're individual goals, team goals, or goals for the company. There's an expression I stolen from someone else, I don't know who, but people work for recognition, but they'll work for a living, but they'll die for recognition, right? So it's really, really important to have that part of your communications mix. So
I completely agree with you on that one, Lee. It's amazing how far it goes when somebody is recognized, and it's amazing how sad it can be when someone will say, nobody's given me a pat on the back at work for some ridiculous amount of time.
Exactly. Yeah. Work till you die. Good job. No.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, as we kind of wrap up this part, there's some takeaways. And so we really focused on, and I appreciate you hanging in here, Heather, I know you have a cold. You're doing fantastic. These 4 key areas that contribute to helping agencies do their best creative work efficiently, right? And those were balance. Obviously, we've got to focus on creating a balance within our organization and for individuals, a balance of process with structure that allows for creativity as well as consistency, quality, and growth or scale of work. We also got to focus on effective communication, both with clients and our team members, especially the hard conversations. Just don't do it in the bathroom. And we want to focus on expectations.
Never in the bathroom. Never, ever.
Except that, you know, there could be an emergency, right? No. Okay.
No. Still not.
Still no. Okay. And focus on setting expectations. So you can set your agency up for success with the client and manage time with those clients equally. And finally, focusing on service, not just to do a great job for our clients and deliver a great work product, but understanding the role that retention plays in your company's ability to continue to deliver a great work product, to deliver great service. You've got to retain your best staff, and that's the only way you can continue producing the best work and providing that best service possible. And of course, if you watch Mad Men, you'll appreciate this observation from Tiffany Allen from my team. Don't let your project management system be a Pete Campbell when it can be a Joan Holloway. So thank you, Tiffany, for giving me that quote.
Well, and that seems like a good way to move into our Q&A then.
Excellent.
Amazing. Thank you, Heather and Lee, for all your great insights. Just a reminder for all you attendees, the full recording of the webinar will be made available to you in a follow-up email tomorrow. And now we're moving into the question and answer portion of the webinar. Remember, you can still submit questions anytime through the GoToWebinar panel, and you can also tweet them to our lovely presenters. And the first question we have is, in relation to extra creative projects, how do you find the time and resources to do those things, especially if you're already stretched thin? So this is referring to that specific slide.
How do you do those things? Which slide were they referencing?
So is it, how can you do some extra creative work when you're already at the breaking point?
Yeah, I think, you know, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So I think you've got to find something small to work on and collaborate on. If you can find something that does double duty, so maybe if you're lucky, your special project is also something someone else needs help on. And, you know, so if you can dually find this other thing to do to kind of broaden your horizons, or, you know, get extra exposure or interaction with another team member in a way that also solves a problem for the business, maybe a window of time can be opened up for you to go do that thing. So that way you can kind of two birds with one stone.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Lee, that looking for those opportunities where you can be helping to accomplish something, I think that's really key. One other thing that I have just witnessed around me, so I'm not necessarily advocating for this because it will take time out of your evenings and weekends, is I've seen people find special projects that they themselves are personally completely passionate about. So whether it's running a podcast on your own or submitting for speaking engagements and doing those on your own kind of time, I've seen people really grow their career by finding something that they just love. I mean, they would honestly list this on Facebook as one of their hobbies, and spending a little bit of time outside of the office to work on it.
Great idea.
Awesome. We'll jump to the next question. How can junior, mid-level people manage their time and client relationships better?
Well, a great project management system would help. Training on project management supplied by experts internally or outside consultants. Shared best practices amongst the more senior people in the organization that mid-level and junior people could take advantage of. Maybe mentoring or sort of peer group sort of collaboration situations, you know what I mean? So where people that are junior can kind of either monitor or have a little time periodically with a more senior person and kind of learn their tricks of solving that sort of situation. Those are a couple of things that come to my mind.
And one thing that I've also seen is kind of on a monthly basis an hour gathering of just brainstorming and idea sharing across a group within an agency. Kind of going to that mentoring and idea sharing that Lee mentioned in a more formal way, that you can get together for an hour, whether that's, you know, in the morning over bagels or if you all go out for drinks in the evening, you know, just talking and collaborating and asking some of the more senior people for suggestions to help some of those more junior people I've seen be really successful as well.
Great.
Definitely. Definitely. Okay, our next question is, how do you manage and prioritize unexpected work requests with strict deadlines?
Yeah, with bribes? No.
Always food.
Yes, you have to find someone that's not as booked as you are and offer them some incentive to help you solve your problem. Yeah, that's again, this is another thing that I think is in part solved by a project management system that can take care of monitoring and giving insight to what's going on. Otherwise, you can't make time out of thin air, right? So something's got to give, and having some prioritization schema for requests is going to be part of that. Maybe that's based on the scope of the engagement with a client, the volume, the type of request that's being made. You got to have some kind of criteria or structure, though, I think, for people to go by.
Awesome. Another question we have, wow, they're just rolling in. Regarding reviews and approvals, how many revisions do you recommend, and how much is too much with a client?
I would say that that's something you need to decide up front. So I think there are a couple of things. I don't think I would go as much to how many as to who actually does need to see it, and how do you define kind of what the status of done is. So, there are a lot of times that the documents will go through the wrong people for reviews. Maybe the CMO does need to see something, but they don't have to see it. It could be one of your key account contact who actually needed to give you approval. And then deciding, what does done look like? Is it I've given it to my client 3 times, and they get it back to me with only 1 change, and I can make that change, and then we can call it good. I don't think it's so much about a number. I think it's about collaborating with your client and deciding, when you give me straightforward revisions on something and they're just very easy for me to go implement, I'm not going to send you another one for review for you to catch a whole bunch of new things you never mentioned in the first 8 times. I'm going to implement them, and then we're going to call it done. So it's really, what is that status?
Thank you, Heather. On to the next one. So when you have cross-geographical teams, with AM teams near clients, but PM and creative execution teams are separate, what are some best practices to keep communication sound?
Sound? Bound? Round? I'm sorry, couldn't hear you.
Sound.
Yes, sound. How can you keep communication sound?
Reasonable.
One thing I would say on that one is, I think the first thing that agencies, whether you're all in the same room together or if you're spread out across geographies, I think you have to be dedicated to success of everybody in the company. You have to, have a drive that every team member, they're not in it for themselves, they're not in it for any one client. They're in it to make the agency and everyone in the agency successful. And I think that helps drive a lot of communication and tear down a lot of communication barriers across the company when you have that drive towards success. But, communicating through a shared project management system is a really easy way. I hate to keep plugging Workfront, but that's how we communicate globally. Having some kind of core business hours will also help. If you decide, from 8 until noon Eastern time, every employee is working, and you can communicate with each other during that time because everybody will be on and available. I know that's not always possible in all geographies, but it is something that can work at least across the United States and also a little bit into Europe. And then just having some communication hierarchy, deciding how do you communicate as a team can also really help.
I like that idea of office hours across organizations, because we have a thing like that with some of our teams that have work with UK clients or Western European clients, and so they literally work slightly different hours than everyone else does in our Minnesota office. But there's like a set, so that's taken into account what are available office hours that apply universally to everybody.
Yeah,
like
it can really help, because you could say, everybody's always contactable, always working between 10 and 2, and you work what you want outside of that, but I know I can schedule a meeting with you, I can IM you, I can text you, I can call you, and you're going to get back to me because you are working, unless you're on vacation.
Okay, so more with so last question. We're running out of time here, but how do you tell a client that what they've asked is totally out of scope of work?
Client, that is totally out of scope of work. No, you have to create I think you have to set expectations for change requests or kinds of things that fall in that category at the beginning of the engagement. So you say, the scope of our engagement covers these sorts of things, and it is going to happen. You need to plant a seed. I think this is important for upgrades and expansion of services anyway, but should there be a request that falls out the scope of this, here's how we'll handle that. I think the prevention is the, what's the expression? An ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure. Yeah. Boy, I'm really digging deep. But you get what I'm saying, right? It's like if you can set the stage for this is how a thing will be handled, then obviously you have to have a process that everyone is aware of internally at the same time. So when the moment comes and a client asks for, hey, I want this $500,000 thing for $50,000 or $5,000, it's like, I appreciate you asking that. Here's our process for determining the value of a particular request, and then they can see, whatever your process is for addressing that, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
totally.
I agree. And I think that's particularly important if you're working on retainer, to have that open line of communication to define what is it that a typical retainer duration of time looks like, and how you had this kind of going out of that scope.
Good point.
All right, and let's just squeeze in one last question. Can you give us some specific tools and resources you would recommend for project management and workflow?
Really? That's a great question. So I can say we used a number of different tools, and we used Google Docs and Google spreadsheets and whatever for a while. And very recently we began the process of evaluating, like everything from Trello to now I'm brain cramping on some of the other ones that we've used. But and we even had a proprietary system called OnePlace. Proprietary meaning that it was developed for a different reason, and we used it for project management. Anyway, but we're moving to, or have moved, I've been gone, to Workfront. So that's, from a growth standpoint, we need a robust system that can do all the things, so to speak, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, and since I work for Workfront, I have to confess that I do work for the company, but I couldn't do my work, and my team has said repeatedly that they will never leave this company because they're afraid to ever leave Workfront. We couldn't do what we do without it.
Awesome.
Although with more and more companies getting it, there's potential I could lose my team. So.
Okay, so unfortunately we've run out of time, but please feel free to tweet any additional questions to our presenters. As you see, their Twitter handles right now are on the slide. And thank you again to Lee and Heather, and of course our partner Workfront, and thank you all for joining us today. We hope you learned something. Keep an eye out on in your inboxes tomorrow for a link to the recording, which you can watch on demand. Thanks again, and please enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.